Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Pints with Jack, the Skype sessions. As many of you know, my wife will soon be quitting her job because she is in the third trimester, and in a couple of weeks we are going to be moving to Wisconsin. But we're making the most of our time in California before we leave, and that is why I am today in the beautifully redesigned studios of Catholic Answers, and I'm interviewing Mr. Cy Kellett, who is the author of A Teacher of Strange Things, who Jesus was, what he taught, and why people still follow him. Cy, welcome to your studio. And
thank you.
welcome to Pints with Jack.
And thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You and I have known each other actually for quite a while.
Yes, we have.
I was thinking about
mostly because you've been, and you would be too modest to say it, but because you have been educating people in the faith and helping adults embrace the faith, the Catholic faith, for it's got to be decades now.
It's not quite decades. It's
really?
a little over a decade, maybe.
Well,
at least in the United States.
Well, you do.
But I have
work.
so much to teach about tea and other refined living as well as the faith.
All you Australians do.
But you
yes.
were actually a teacher of me. We first met when you were giving a course at the Diocesan Institute on Vatican II.
Oh, yes.
Have you blocked that out of your mind?
No, I remember that. I love talking about the Second Vatican Council. I remember it, but have you recovered? I mean, have you learned the truth since then? You've been like, man, you made a lot of stuff up.
Well, I've often thought that it's a little unfair to have me as a student, just not because I know everything, it's just I'm really annoying and will keep asking questions. And whenever you said, does anyone have any thoughts on this? Immediately my hand went up and he said, is there someone else other than David?
Yeah.
And I think we then crossed paths again when you gave a talk at a Theology on Tap event on voting your conscience.
Right. Yeah. Right. I remember that. That was at Phil's.
Phil's barbecue.
Yeah.
Best place to have Theology on Tap.
I know. Theology on barbecue sauce is better than Theology on Tap.
And then you got a job here at Catholic Answers.
Yeah.
Those
things did not follow immediately upon one another, but yes, eventually
it was a slow burn.
It was a slow burn. Yes, right.
And this is where my wife, assistant producer Marie, also works.
Yes. And I, because I knew you for a long time, I was constantly teasing Marie on air about the low quality of her prospective spouse.
Wow.
And I probably went too far with that, so I apologize.
Well, my mother hates you, just FYI.
Well, a lot of mothers do.
But you and Marie have now worked together for several years quite closely. And so with us leaving, I was wondering, what are you going to most miss about not having me in San Diego?
Oh, it's a long list. It's not really fair to put me on the spot. But what will I most miss? It'll be Marie.
That was a good answer. And that is also the right answer because you still have a few more days with her.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, for those who haven't listened to Catholic Answers Live, and even for those who regularly listen but missed your arrival, would you mind just filling in a little bit of your background? Because it's quite varied.
Yeah, it's quite varied, which is a very polite English way of saying you can't hold down a job for very long, which is exactly the story of my life.
Get a job, hippie.
Yeah, exactly. And I was a hippie, kind of. After Boston College, bachelor's degree in theology, went to teach boys at a boys' high school, Zavarian Brothers High School in Westwood, Massachusetts. I loved that. Took the boys on retreats, was part of the retreat team that went to a Catholic worker house with seniors and fell in love with the Catholic worker. So I left teaching and lived in the Catholic worker house for a couple years and eventually got a master's degree in English literature. So now I have a bachelor's degree in Catholic theology and a master's degree in English literature. What can you do with that? I became a writer for and then editor of a Catholic newspaper. Because there is literally nothing else to do with those 2 degrees. So, except teach, and you know how bad a teacher I am. So, then after I left there, and that was here in San Diego, bit by bit, I started hearing about Immaculate Heart Radio. And I really, after almost 12 years of working at a Catholic diocesan newspaper, which is like the definition of preaching to the choir. Like there's nobody who reads a diocesan newspaper who's not Catholic, basically. And that is really important. Like people always make fun of preaching to the choir like it's a bad thing. Well, the choir needs preaching too. Like they need to hear it. But I wanted to try media that was more, that was turning out to the world more. And it just seemed brilliant to me that Catholic radio was growing. So basically, I started stalking the people from Immaculate Heart Radio, trying to get them to notice me. I applied for a job there, eventually started doing on-air work there, and then ended up here when Patrick Coffin left. Because it's a very strange thing, but while I was working for Immaculate Heart Radio, which is in Sacramento, I was here in San Diego. I never moved. And so when Patrick would need someone to fill in for him, Darren invited me to come fill in on those days. And so I started to know the people here and understand the show and all that. So it really was, for me, a great gift. It was providential. The Lord was working and moving much to my advantage. And I ended up here 4.5 years ago.
So you started turning up and kept turning up until they just gave you a job.
That's what I do, David. That's what I did at all of those places.
I did the same thing in dating.
Yeah, right. Just keep turning up.
Just keep turning up.
Well, I think it was Woody Allen who said like 90% of life is showing up. And I think that that's actually true. Like Darren would say to me, and I don't know if I've ever said this to you, Darren, he would say, we can connect you from home for the show, because I had the Comrex and everything from Immaculate Radio at home. I had a studio at home. And I always said no, because I wanted to come here. Like being in the room with people makes a difference. And and it did for me.
Plus, you can then take the books which are being given away on the kitchen table on your way out.
Yeah, right. That's right. And occasionally there were snacks, which is my primary motivator in life.
So we're going to talk about your book in a moment. But
what, A Teacher of Strange Things? Who
yes.
Jesus was, what he taught, and why people still follow him? That book?
Yes, that book. But this isn't your first book.
No, it's not.
I want to talk about your first book.
Okay.
What was it?
Limina, a novella of Catholics in space. Which is, I feel that's a really good subtitle. A novella of Catholics in space.
Did you and Jimmy bond over that? Because the first person I heard talking about Catholics in space was Jimmy. How the liturgical calendar would work.
Here's a secret that you might not know about Jimmy. I'll give you. He's actually a very good fiction writer, and somebody should encourage him to publish his fiction. Because I would be intimidated to be put in the same category with Jimmy in that regard. But I just wanted to write this story, so I wrote it and published it, and it's out there, and now people like you ask me about it.
Marie was actually reading it on one of our first dates.
Was she really? Mm-hmm. You read that? Was she here? Or did she read? She really? Did. She's one of like 4 or 5 people who have read it, and all the rest are family members.
Well, it's now the Bates family as well.
Oh, good. Very good. Thank you. Thanks for reading it.
Oh, I didn't read it.
You didn't? Oh, okay, good.
This is why we're married. We can divide and conquer.
She could tell you about it. No bother. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your book, A Teacher of Strange Things.
Yeah.
What is it that motivates a mild-mannered radio host such as yourself to write a book about Jesus? Wasn't the Bible good enough for you?
That's good. And I think you mean ill-mannered, but mild-mannered will do. Thank you. We have an obligation constantly to speak to the culture. That is, the way a theologian might say it is to mediate the gospel to those around us, so that the Bible is good enough in the sense that Jesus is good enough. He could evangelize for himself. He doesn't need me to do it. But for some reason, he does entrust the job of mediating the gospel to the person that we meet, to us. I don't know why he does that. He's going to have to explain that, because it doesn't seem to be a very good system. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it just seems to have so many failures, but he knows what he's doing. And as we all know, he's always motivated by love. So for some loving reason, he leaves it up to us to mediate the gospel, to be the thing that takes the gospel and makes it real and applicable to the people in our life, our children, our spouse, those around us, or those who read books, or those who listen to the radio or podcasts or that kind of thing. So the Bible is good enough, but that doesn't get us off the hook from having to constantly find new ways of sharing the good news.
But you're now done because you've written your book. You're now off the hook.
Oh yeah, well no, I don't think so. I think you're supposed to keep doing it till your last breath.
Okay.
I think the nurse is giving you the IV, and you're supposed to still be evangelizing. But yeah,
Tolkien wrote a poem called Mythopoeia, and he wrote it for C.S. Lewis, who I'm kind of a fan of.
Yes, yeah, I know.
And in that poem, he speaks about God being this pure white light, and in the rest of us, as we subcreate, as we do what Jesus called us to do, we basically refract it and we show forth something of God, but in our own little particular part of the spectrum.
Right. It's such beautiful. I mean, Tolkien is.
And this book is very you.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I didn't. That's interesting. No one has said that to me, but I don't know. But you might be the only person who's read it. No one else has said that they've read it either. So
well, it's got your name on the front of it, so I'm pretty sure that you wrote it.
I'm interested to hear if you want to tell me why. Like what?
I think it's mainly the tone. I mean, you and I have been interacting on and off for 8 years, probably. And you've always been lighthearted and mildly insulting, and.
I am that way. That's
and you
true.
often propose something for consideration, and that's what this book feels like. An invitation to reconsider Jesus, to repropose Jesus as an alternative to perhaps the purely static stained glass window image that some people might have in their minds.
Exactly. That's the idea, is to propose Jesus so that that's basically what the attempt was, to say reconsider, because we don't live in a culture where many people have never considered Jesus, that at some point they heard the name, they know the basic outlines, and in many cases have rejected Jesus. So our job as missionaries is not at first to make a first proclamation. It's to make a second or a third or a fifth proclamation of the gospel. You're very sharp. That's exactly what I was trying to do.
That's why Marie married me. That was part of me that you could never understand. But I'm very type A, and I like structure. So your book is divided into 3 main parts. Would you mind just outlining what they were, and then we'll go a little bit into each one.
Right. Okay. So who Jesus was, what he taught, and why people still follow him. And do you want me to give a little outline of each? Okay. So the who Jesus was, I mean, there's 2 ways to answer that, or there's 2 kind of approaches to that. And I tried to do both. And I'm not sure if it was successful or not, but one way to answer who Jesus was is to give the biographical facts, like who was Caesar? Caesar was a Roman from the 1st century BC. And so who was Jesus? But I also wanted to do in that section was who was Jesus, like, who was he? Like, what kind of person was he? What was he like? What was it like to talk with him? And so that required some active imagination, but mostly just referring to the Gospels to try to, and so one of them is like the Spanish have 2 words for knowing. In English, we don't, but the knowing about and the knowing. And so first,
analytical and experiential. Right.
And so I wanted to do both there. One, the knowing about, because my wife said to me, my wife's a convert to the Catholic faith from nothing. Her family was atheistic, or I don't know exactly how to describe it.
They slept in on Sundays.
They did indeed, yeah. Or if there were like mineral baths and raw nuts to eat, then they got up and went to that. But I hope none of her family watches this now, because that's more of their. They were health nuts, her parents, I guess.
About a month ago, I was giving a talk on Our Lady, and I mentioned Solomon and the natural punishment for having as many wives as he did, having more than one mother-in-law. And then I realized that it was being live streamed.
And your mother-in-law was.
And I sent out a link before I started speaking to the family.
Yeah.
Family have to forgive you. Just that simple.
They do. Well, I hope they will. So, but she said to me, you think that people know these basic facts, like the when and the where. But she said, I didn't know any of that. Like when people talk about Jesus, I didn't know, is that 500 years ago? Is that 5,000 years ago? Is it myth? Is it history? I'm not really sure. So I tried to do that, put the here's the time period. Here's what that was like. And then
And you do that through looking at a number of, you call them moments in Scripture.
yeah. Right, that's the idea.
And I loved what you said earlier about actually getting to know what Jesus is like.
Right.
Because if you were born and raised a Christian, you kind of take that somewhat for granted.
Right.
Particularly until you start reading other texts about Jesus. If you read, say, the Gnostic Gospels or the Quran, the Jesus that you get there is just two-dimensional. He's not a full flesh and blood person.
Yeah.
But when you read the Scriptures, when you read the New Testament, it's much more like encountering a person.
It is,
because it should be.
Right, and it's that way because I think that Jesus taught the apostles by parables, and that ingrains a kind of storytelling habit. And so the Gospels themselves, as you know, you can read the full arc of the Gospel. St. John's Gospel goes from the beginning of everything, and then has this arc. Or you can go to St. John's Gospel and you can read about the healing of the man born blind. And either way, if you focus on the little story or the big story, you're getting the gospel. Like it's very accessible to, and that's why Christians have always read it that way. And many people don't realize that. Even Christians don't realize this way of reading the gospel, that we go to Sunday Mass and we read a section of the gospel, is part of how the Gospels are written. It's part of the intention, clearly, of the Gospel writers, that these are liturgical books, in other words. They're meant to be taken bit by bit. So if you want to introduce people to Jesus, you can basically just and here's a story, and guaranteed this story, whatever you land on in the Gospel, is going to be about a few hundred words long, and it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end, and it's going to introduce you to the person of Jesus. They're like little epiphanies, each little bit.
Yeah. Well, in part 2, you talk about what he taught. And I think everybody, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, everybody still likes to think that Jesus taught what they already believe.
Oh, sure. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So in that second part, how do you start trying to separate the fact from the fiction?
Well, I have to say my primary motive in that section was to make clear that Jesus is not just a teacher of morals, because I do think that that's what people think, is that he's like Confucius, like that, who is essentially a moral teacher, that, and gives you Jesus is a moral teacher. There's no question about that, but that's not his primary teaching. His primary teaching is not what to do. His primary teaching is a revelation of what is, and you can't know what is without the revelation he's giving you. And so what I wanted to distinguish there was a teacher of kind of ordinary things, which is morals, and a teacher of strange things, which is sacraments. And I think I just said that right now better than I said that anywhere in the book.
I was thinking that was good. You should have written that down somewhere.
I should have put that in the book. No, that'll be in the next edition. So, but it's strange when he starts speaking about sacraments, and that's the part that a lot of people just glide over. Many of our Protestant brothers and sisters, of course, are unwilling to get into just how weird Jesus is.
Oh, and he is weird. I mean,
right.
Who was it Washington that had his own version of the Bible where he cut out everything?
Thomas Jefferson.
Jefferson, that was it.
Yeah.
He cut out all of the supernatural.
Right.
And he had to do that because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Lewis has a similar kind of crusade in his writings, repeatedly emphasizing that Jesus didn't just come with a new moral code, and we don't just need a new moral teacher, because he says we got plenty of those.
Right. Even Jesus acknowledged that. He mostly taught what Moses taught.
Yeah. Love your neighbor comes from the Old Testament.
Right.
But the point is, both that and other teachers like Confucius, the Buddha, whatever, we don't do what they say.
No.
So
Right.
it's not really so much that we need a new set of rules.
Right.
We need something else. We actually need God himself. We need his divine life communicated to us.
Amen, brother. Yeah.
And that principally happens through what Jesus said, what he did, and the sacraments that he gave his church.
Right. And this is something in Mere Christianity, I think, that Lewis actually avoided to a certain degree the liturgical Jesus.
Yeah.
And with good reason, because what he's trying to do in those lectures that become that, really unbelievable book, is a different thing. But I wanted here to make clear that the liturgical church is not an accretion that piles on top of the true Jesus. That Jesus is a teacher of a liturgical religion. If he says baptize and he tells you how to baptize, he's a liturgy teacher. That's what he's teaching you. And he says, do this in memory of me. He's teaching liturgy. So you can't get to the real teacher without that. To the real Jesus without that, without also admitting he's very strange, and he teaches this strange sacramental liturgical religion.
And his entire mission is literally incarnational, both when he came and also how he reached people.
Yes.
For the longest time, I wasn't a fan of Christmas. I just kind of didn't get it. But it was only when I was...
The English invented Christmas.
I know.
Nobody really celebrated Christmas until you all decided.
Maybe it was because Santa stopped visiting me. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
But it was only when I was rereading through the Gospels, and it really struck me how everything Jesus did, there was a corporeal nature to it. He didn't just always declare somebody to be healed.
No.
He spits on the ground, takes mud, plasters it over people's face,
Isn't
tells
that
them to
weird?
wash.
Yeah, right.
And it's throughout Scripture. You find very similar things in the Old Testament.
And that's what I'm trying to get at a little bit in the book, is if you don't think that that's weird that he spit on the ground and put mud on, then you're not getting it. Because the gospel writer knows it's weird. Jesus knows it's weird. Why are you acting like, it's just the way that, this fits perfectly with my comfortable life? Well, get uncomfortable,
Absolutely. Well, what about the third part? Why people still follow him? There are, 2.3 billion Christians in the world.
Right.
So what is
at least nominally.
They at least stick to the form. Close enough.
Yeah.
But what is it about a Jewish carpenter from the first century in a backwater town?
Right.
Why is it this many people still seem drawn to him?
Right. And I think that it's because they, in one way or another, and there are many ways that this happens, actually meet him. And so I do believe very much in the personal encounter with Jesus. Like I don't think that that's funny. I don't think that's a joke. I don't think that that's weird. I think personal encounter with Jesus is extremely important. Now, some people are Christian out of habit or out of, that's what our family does or whatnot. And so many people can get to adulthood and go, have I met Jesus? And so I wanted to write a little bit about the meeting with Jesus as it really happens, as opposed to as it happens on TV with the TV preachers. Because many people, I think, are like, I've never had anything like that happen. I've never been in the gutter and Jesus pulled me out. Well, guess what? Peter was never in the gutter and Jesus pulled him out and got him into rehab. And most people don't meet Jesus that way. Yeah. And it's a real, I'm sure it raises a lot of money, all that drama, but it's not that dramatic in most cases. In Peter's case, I tried to point out in the book, there's several different tellings of where Jesus and Peter met because it's so normal. It's not like there's this shocking moment and so therefore all the gospels tell the same. They all tell it differently because it's a normal meeting between human beings in which Peter becomes alert to something very powerful in Jesus, but it's still a normal meeting. And that people need to be open to that he meets you in subtle and simple ways, most of us.
And I think for those of us who were born and raised in the church, particularly when we really start taking on our faith as our own, and you hear amazing testimonies, you always feel a little guilty that yours should be better.
Yeah.
It's like, man, I should have just done drugs.
I know, right? Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. You feel sheepish that you don't have a good, drama to relate. But I do think most people's conversion stories are fascinating. Like even the very ordinary conversion story is often fascinating when the person tells you about the personal touches that came with it, the way that this won't mean anything to you, but I always thought that butterflies meant this. And then I saw a butterfly. Okay, well, you're right. It wouldn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
But Jesus personally met you there. That's, so it is always very interesting, but it's not always super dramatic.
Yeah.
That's all. And so I tried to talk about the encounter with Jesus and then what Catholics call conversion. I think what Protestants call conversion is that moment of the altar call, but that's not what Catholics mean by conversion. Catholics mean by conversion like what you and Marie are doing in your married life, bit by bit, conforming to one another in love. That's what happens with Peter. Peter's like the slowest conversion. It's like, come on, Peter, come on. And then after conversion, of course, here's a little quiz question for you. A C word, it's the source and summit of the Christian life.
The celebration of the Eucharist.
Yeah, right. Or communion.
Holy Communion.
Yeah, right. So you gave us the E word. But yeah, right. So then about communion, about what happens to people in communion with Jesus. People do have communion with Jesus in this world. And I think there's a lot of people who don't believe it. They think we're faking it or something. Like, it's not fake. Like, he will commune with you if you want. And then, of course, being a missionary, ending on being a missionary.
And as I said, I liked it as a book to repropose Jesus.
Thank you.
Particularly, I think particularly for people who have grown up in the church, we
Really?
often need to be shaken out a little bit of what we have conceived, what we have been simply told, and just reproduce endlessly. Because conversion is not just a single encounter; it's a repeated encounter with Jesus.
Right.
And we do that through all of the ways that he gave to his church, both through Scripture and the sacraments.
Right. And I think you probably picked up on then that something that I was thinking was hidden when I was writing it, but people have told me it's not that hidden. That I really wrote the book for the adult children who have left the church. It's who I was trying to speak to. That adult child who so many parents feel like, what did I do wrong that the child didn't get it? Probably didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
It's probably maybe you did. Maybe you could have been a saint, but the truth is the evangelizing and catechizing power of MTV and and I'm dating myself even by saying MTV.
I remember when there was music on that channel.
Yeah, right. But the power of that is really something, and all you are is the little parent. And so I wanted a book that a mom could say, son, would you read this for me, and we'll talk about Jesus, because that's all I care about is that you know Jesus, because I think that is what moms care about and dads care about.
Yeah, wonderful conversation starter. And we're going to wrap up our conversation. But before we do, where can people go to get a copy of A Teacher of Strange Things? And where can they also listen to you on the radio and listen to your podcasts?
If I have a box of these at my house. If you come by, I'll give you one. But if you don't know my address,
I'll post it on the internet later.
That'd be horrible. You can go to shop.catholic.com. You can ask for it at your Catholic bookstore. They'll order it for you, and I want you. And please support your local Catholic bookstore. You can get it on Amazon. The audio version, like the digital versions, are out on our website shop.catholic.com and on Amazon, but the audio version is not out yet. I apologize for that.
Did you get somebody with an English accent to read it?
I tried to get Liam Neeson. Is he Irish? Is that what he is? I think he's a Northern Irishman,
Yeah, he's
right?
Irish.
So I tried.
But he was also Aslan.
Oh yeah, see, but it's just I wanted somebody who could be like, I have a very particular. So, but I couldn't get Liam Neeson because they told me that we don't have a budget. So I read it myself, and they're working on cleaning up the audio now. That's why it's taking so long. But what was the other thing you asked?
Where can people listen to Catholic Answers Live, and where can they get the podcasts?
Catholic.com. Catholic.com. You can get the podcast, Catholic Answers Focus, wherever you get this podcast. And you can get it on YouTube, and this is on YouTube and Facebook. Do you do Facebook too? I've seen you on YouTube.
I do Facebook.
Yeah. I get confused on Facebook, so I always go to YouTube, but all those places you can get us, Catholic Answers Live and Catholic Answers Focus.
Wonderful. Well, Cy, thank you for inviting me into your studio to interview you.
I really appreciate you coming in and being so kind to do the interview. I really do.
Well, I know.
I've always liked you Australians.
Yeah.
You're wonderful people.
Well, Marie is definitely going to miss you, despite everything that she says.
That I've said about her. Oh, that she says about me. She's great. Maria's great. And congratulations on the new baby coming.
Thank you.
Little Gary. Is that what you decided on, Gary?
No, and Cyril is off the table as well.
Cyril. I couldn't even talk my wife into naming our son Cyril. So I thought maybe I could trick you guys into. I mean, you're English. Cyril is kind of like there are Cyrils in England, right?
There are Cyrils.
Yeah.
And there was a St. Cyril of Jerusalem, so you got a good early church father.
Yeah, right.
But no, sorry.
No, really?
No.
Kellet Kirill. That's what the Russians say,
No. It's got to sound regal. Unless you can stick king or duke in front of it.
In front of Cyril, yeah.
King Cyril?
It's kind of a little sad. Yeah. All right. Thanks for hurting my feelings.
You're welcome. And everyone, please join us again next time when we will go further up and further in. Cheers.